Welcome back to the SSAS and training sessions class then. So in last session we discussed about the different processing techniques and I told you guys that I'll be looking at the example for what you call incremental processing. So whatever the example you take, it will be like you need to have an update statement in your database and to give a hint to the analysis services that these are the newly inserted records or these are the already loaded records and these are the newly inserted records. Unfortunately, I did not find much time today to work on an example in SSIS, but definitely next session uh, I'll, I'll try to explain with an example. But if you see here, incremental, it's just a concept, loading the data incrementally. So you'll have many solutions. As we discussed in last session, if you have a table called sales, you can have what you call an integer ID, auto incremental ID, what we call identity column, right? So whenever a record is inserted into this table, this will be automatically incrementing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So whenever the data is loaded, you can have the maximum ID into a different staging table or fact table, what we call, like let's say 50 is the maximum record, or not when the table is loaded, but when you process the data into your cube, after that you can have a SQL statement to update this with the maximum record that has been loaded or that is in the table. So it will be 5. So after that, the incremental processing will take from 6 because the query that you will give in the incremental processing will be select star from sales table where ID greater than get the ID from here. So let's say you got 6, 7, 8 records next time. So this will, once this is loaded, again this will be updated with 8. The maximum ID that is loaded is 8. And then if you add 9, 10, 11, so it will load these 3 records into the cube and again it will be updated with 11. So you need to have a mechanism to update a certain, update a table or a parameter or something which can give a hint to the analysis services to process only the newly inserted records. So this is a concept. Similar, this is one way of doing it. Another way, if you ask me, you can have, let's say this is your sales table. You can have one column called loaded yes or no. By default, you can set it as n. So everything will be n, okay, first time, and load the cube by incremental processing. So select star from sales where loaded is equal to n. Everything will be loaded into the cube. The next step is update all the records to yes. Whatever is there in the table will be updated to yes. Now, next day, when we load the data, you will get few more n's. And it will go to the cube processing, incremental processing. It will pull the newly inserted records into the cube. And again, the next step is update all the records with yes. Everything is loaded. So this particular column and the third step here, updating this column, are for cube to know what is the newly inserted records. Okay, so you're taking a lot of pain here to insert only the incremental data. So the general process is pretty straightforward. Right click process, get the data. But to do the incremental processing, you need to have an SSIS package and an extra step added and extra column added into your fact table. All those things make it work only if your data is incremental, which means your historical data should not be updated. Let's say the already loaded data is updated, then it's a pain to get the updated record and the newly inserted record. It's very difficult to do using the incremental processing. To do this, I'm not saying it's impossible to do, it's difficult to do. To do this, you need to have one more flag, or whether it's updated or whether it's inserted, something like that. So it's very difficult process. So if it is updated, you have to negate it. If it is inserted, just pull that. And if it is updated, get the updated record and also get the negated record. So that's a huge process. So when you face these kind of issues in real time, then you will come up with so many solutions. We discussed about 2 solutions. There may be one more solution too, where you can have the query for the incremental processing like to get the maximum record inserted in the cube by using an MDX query too. There is a concept. You can write an MDX query to get the maximum ID available in your cube and use that ID to get only the only the inserted records. So to mix these two, you need to use linked server. So that's a different concept and a complex one. That's the longest route to get the data of about only the inserted records. So when you have such kind of concept like incremental load, you'll have so many solutions. The main thing you have to do is find out which one suits better to your project. For most of the projects, this is easy way. Have an ID and get the max ID and maintain it in somewhere after the queue process is done. Even this makes easier, like yes, no, default it to no. And once it is loaded, update all the records. This is pretty easy. Update all the records with yes. You don't need to get this and you don't need to have an extra table, something like that. Update every record with yes, which means everything is loaded into the queue and whatever newly comes in will be with the flag false. No, it's not loaded. So it will pull, the incremental load will pull only that information. I'll try to use this scenario to do an incremental process. It's going to take like 30 to 40 minutes to create a simple SSAS package and test it out. I'll do it and I'll try to present in the next session. So we are going to discuss about few concepts related to the dimensions now. Let me erase it and let me go to the. So when anyone talk about the cube, the most important dimension by which users want to see their data or their metrics is date dimension. I can say out of 100 cubes, 95% cubes will have date dimension. Without date dimension, it doesn't make much sense to most of the businesses. I won't say all the businesses, but for most of the businesses, date dimension is very key because they want to analyze the data or look for the information by date. If you talk about data warehouse, definitely there will be date dimension. If there is no date dimension, if you have not created date dimension as part of your data warehouse, then something is wrong in your design. You have to go with the date dimension. And you all know date is fixed. It won't change for you and it won't change for me or it won't change for some other business. Jan 1st is Jan 1st everywhere, right? So it doesn't say, oh, for banking, Jan 1st is Jan 31st, and for something else, Jan 1st is Jan 2nd. It won't be like that. It's a fixed data. So it's easy, and there are a lot of stored procedures available online to create a date dimension on the fly. So you just need to copy the stored procedure, execute it, and give the parameters, and boom, it will create the date dimension for you. If you want to see an example, create date dimension in SQL server. So creating date dimension, let's say this guy should have something. Okay, see, there is a temporary table. This guy has not used the stored procedure, but he used looks like a what you call cursors and temporary tables. So this is fine. This object's row number. Okay, here is the create date dimension and a couple of nodes. If you execute these statements one by one, it will create a date dimension for you. So first he is creating a temporary table and he'll load the data like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on until 2019. And once it is done, he's creating the actual date dimension table and he's inserting the data into that based on the data from the temporary table. So while inserting into the main table, he's trying to calculate what is the week of the year, what is the week of the month. So it's so easy creating. Okay. And if you see here, this is trying to update some columns in that one. So this is end-to-end date dimension, how to do that. So along with that, if you can go either with that option or I think in one of my projects, I took the help of analysis services to create the date dimension for me. So how? Let's see. So go to the new dimension, right click new dimension, click on next. You see two options, generate a timetable in the data source and generate a timetable on the server. If I select this, it creates a new timetable, time dimension table in the underlying data source, which means whatever the data source that you have selected here, the dimension will contain data for the data range, attributes, and calendars you specify. You must have permissions. This is very important. You must have permissions. Whatever the ID that you're using to process your cube, that should have permission to create objects, because it is going to create a table object. So it should have access to the underlying data source. If you have all those things, then you can click next. And here, what is the first calendar day? From when to when you want to maintain? Let's say I want to maintain data from 2010, which is Friday, Jan 1st, 2010 to let's say December 2018. I'm good with that. And time periods, I want a year, half year, quarter, trimester, month, 10 days, week, and so on. And click on next. Regular calendar is known. Physical calendar, when your physical month starts. Let's say my physical month starts on April 1st. See, every business will have a physical year and the calendar year, right? So let's say physical calendar naming convention, this is fine. And reporting, they may have a different reporting. Let's say they start reporting on June or maybe July, third quarter. And manufacturing, let's say if there is a manufacturing, you can have that. And ISO 8601, all these things are not important, but I'm just adding it to create a big date dimension in your database. So click on next. You see what column, what attributes it is gonna create and what hierarchies it is gonna create. This is a beautiful option if you don't have your date dimension table in your source. So the key column will be date, and year, half year, quarter, trimester, month, 10 days, whatnot, day of the year, all everything. Whatever people are calculating here in the scripts, manually writing, and it's doing for you. The analysis services will do it for you. Click on next, 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 and so on. And also it creates the hierarchies, year, half year, and so on. And year, trimester, month, 10 days, and so on. And everything, even ISO 8601, year to week to day. Okay. Click on finish or generate schema now. If you generate schema now, it will generate the schema for you. Welcome to the schema generation wizard. And you see the dimension is created. And click on next. And data source view name, this one, everything is fine. Click on next. Create primary keys on the dimension table. Create indexes relating to your populate. Yeah, populate timetable. Do not populate only if empty. So I'm selecting populate. Click on next. Separator should be underscore, fine. Primary key column prefix should be PK. Foreign key should be FK. Everything looks good. Click on next. Data source view training. Schema assigned. Data will be preserved. Timetable will be populated. Finish. Validating cubes. It's still going on. Let's see. Let's give some time for that. Okay, saving changes. And you see on the right, the table is picked up automatically. You see the timetable and PK underscore date is the primary key, and it's all success. Generation completed successfully. Now, what I will do is I'll go to my SQL server, connect to my SQL server, and databases, wide world importers, tables, and you see dbo.time, the new table created. And if I go for select top 1000 rows, you will see all the columns. PK is the date, okay, and the date name, year, calendar year, everything is calculated starting from 2010. And see how many columns it has created and how many rows it has. I mean, all the year rows has been generated. You see, how many columns are there? 202 columns in total. And if I take out the top 1000, it will give you the total number of rows that are available. 3,287 rows for 8 years or so, whatever I've selected. And now that table will be automatically added to your to your SSAS view. SSAS DSV is what I selected, and or else I would have picked the existing one, but I selected a new one, so it has added to this, and it created a dimension out of it. Or you can create, I mean, while creating the what you call the date dimension on the server, I selected the new data source view. That's why it has created a new one here. Or else you can add it to this. So if you observe here, it's a lot of work in real. If you want to create a table like this, it's a lot of work. Still, people prefer to create their own, but if people are not comfortable in creating their own, it's good to take the help of analysis services, and you can pick what columns you want. Okay, and that's how a time dimension is created in your server. I mean, in your underlying server, and the time dimension is added. And if you go to the dimension here, let me go to this view, which is you're familiar with, and the attribute should be like this. This is how we're seeing all other dimensions, right? You see, all the attributes are added, and most important hierarchies that we have requested. If you see reporting year-wise hierarchy, reporting year, half year, quarter, month, week, day, and reporting year, trimester, month, week, day, and similarly for manufacturing, for everything. How long it's going to take for you to create this? It's going to take quite some time. So this is the importance they're giving, analysis services is giving for the time dimension. You can take the help of analysis services because it is predefined. These are the predefined attributes. These are the predefined hierarchies based on the selections that you made while generating the time dimension. Now, let's quickly see one more option here. If I select the third one, generate a timetable on the server, you see create a time dimension directly on the server without using an underlying data source. The dimension will contain data for the date range, attributes, and calendars you specify. So the data, the difference between the option 2 and option 3 here is the option 2 will create a table in the underlying database. Table 3 will have the data on the server directly. It won't maintain it. It won't maintain a table. So let me quickly show you. Click on next. I'm going to give the same 2010 to 2018. Let me select all the stuff. Click on next. Physical, let's say it starts on April, and let's say this starts on July, and manufacturing, let's say it starts on okay, and ISO calendar. Click on next. Let me call it as time 1, and all the attributes and everything will be there. If I click on finish, it created now, and if you see the table on the right, it is not from any table. So this says that it is on the server. If you go and check your views, you'll not have time 1. If you go and check here, you'll not have time 1. So this is directly, the data is available on the server. The table information, the relational table information is storing on the analysis services. If I process it, let me quickly process both the dimensions. First, let me start with the time one, which is created on the server. Okay, deployed. So first time, so it is selecting process full by default. And you know what it will take if it is the second time onwards. There are huge number of attributes. It's gonna take some time, definitely. Okay, here it is. Now the cube is processed without data in your underlying database, and you can see all the hierarchies. This looks beautiful, right? The hierarchies, and it has taken care of all the relationships too. If you go to the attribute relationships, you see all the relationships are taken care, how it flows. This is having these attributes in its tummy, and it has this hierarchy, and the second hierarchy is manufacturing date, week, and so on and so on. Here if you see physical day has physical week and physical month, two different hierarchies starting from here: date, physical day, physical week, and physical year or something, and the second hierarchy. So if you see these kind of relationships and everything, it will take at least half a day for you to create. And if you have to create and generate the, load the data for your timetable, it's going to take at least 1 day for you, which analysis services has done in half a minute. Now, let's process the other one. This reads the data from your underlying database, which we have created. So it's deploying the project. and let me select one. Done. And now you can browse it. This is available for browsing, time dimension. And even in this one, all the attribute relationships will be set by default by the analysis services, because it created this dimension and dimension and the attributes in it and hierarchies in it, and also the underlying table. If you go to any hierarchy, it shows the hierarchies. Let's see ISO. I don't know what is this hierarchy. Or it's by week, week 1, week of 20, week 21 of 20, something like that. So this is about the date dimensions in this option. And if you go for the other, there are few other templates given by the analysis services. If you don't know what columns will be available in a particular template of data, like for example, time here, right? Generate a non-time table. It has given few templates. Let's say, for example, promotion template. If you don't know what columns will be available, and if you're generating the table for it, if you're designing the data model for that, for let's say a product template, or if you want any template, it gives you some hint what kind of columns should be available. But I don't think it, I mean, it won't populate the data. The reason is, if you see here, create a new non-time dimension table, table in the underlying data source, you must have permissions to create this. So optionally, you can choose to build the dimension using the template. Okay, optional, you can select that. But if you see the difference here, um, the dimension will contain data for the data range, but here you will not find that, because this is a template and the data is not fixed. My product company will have a different product information, and your product company will have different product information. This helps in giving a template idea on the template. If you see for product, you can have product and standard cost, category, color, list size, list price, size, and so on. These are the default columns that you can have, and you can have product group, product band, SKU, size, and so on. You can select all these things, what columns you need to have. This is a changing dimension. If you select a changing dimension, it will create a surrogate key. If you don't select this, you know what is changing dimension, right? Slowly changing dimensions. So if it is a slowly changing dimension, it creates some extra columns for this. If I select this, and if you see product, category, and so on, everything will be here. And if I select the generate schema now, finish, okay, details have been written to the task list. Something is wrong. Let's see what is that. Show details, prevent generation details. I mean, what is this task list? I never use this, so I'm trying to find out what is the task list. Okay, close it. Oh, here it is. So yeah, this is fine. This is expected. 0 of 29 errors. Let me uncheck the warnings and messages. So this is expected. My bad. So what it is saying is the product dot standard cost, the attribute is not related. What it is saying is it has created the table, but there is no mapping. There is no mapping for your for this stuff. So from where you are gonna get this column? There is no table. So you need to add the table with these columns and load the data and get it into your what you call analysis services. Let me quickly check whether the table is created or not. To be honest, I've never used this option. If it is created, then your job is to populate only the your job is to populate the data. I don't see any table created for that. So it gives only the template of the dimension, so that it's a hint to you to go and create a DBO table and get the data into the table and use the table in your analysis services to make the product dimension live. So this is about the different options we have here. The third one, the fourth one is just a hint that gives you what attributes can a account template can have, or a sales reason template can have. These are the most common used dimensions, like for example, product and employee. If you see employee, you can see most common attributes like department name and what is the title, what is the height, date, birth date, vacation hours, and base rate, email address, and so on. It is giving you some hint what columns, and that doesn't mean you should have only these columns. You can have extra columns too, or you can have less columns too. It gives you a little hint to you, that's it. Okay. So these are the different types of dimensions you can create with the help of analysis services. Okay. So that's about that timetable and generating the timetable and generate on the server and on the underlying database and generating a non-timetable dimension schemas. Now, let's see an interesting concept or topic in analysis services. We call it as role-playing dimensions. What are role-playing dimensions? Let's say the scenario here is if I go to the wide world works and let me add tables. I'm gonna remove few things except employee, or let's say I'm deleting all the dimension tables. Okay, and I'm deleting all the facts that I've created or the tables that I've created. I'm using the option arrange tables so that I don't want to go up and down. Dock it and close it and close it. Now let me take out the employee too, and let me take out city info. I've taken out everything except the sales data. Now let me add a new table. So, oops, even this is a what you call named query. It's not a table. That's why it's not showing there. Let me delete it. I'm starting fresh. So I'm taking the table sale, okay, and I'm taking the related tables, which means it will bring all the related tables. Select OK, and let me arrange it. Okay. Now, if you see here, this customer has two relationships. One is related to the customer key, and second is related to the bill to customer key. Let's say you ordered a product. Who is the customer? And the credit card is used by, I mean, if my wife placed an order, it is in her name or in her account to her address, but using my credit card. So bill to me and product to her, right? So there are two kinds of two information captured in the fact data. One is your customer, who is the actual customer and to whom we have to bill it. Similarly, if you go to the date dimension, if you see what is the invoice date and what is the delivery date. So when the invoice was generated and when it was delivered. Now, let's create a dimension on the customer and the date and fact table on the sales real quick. So let me add a new dimension and let me add customer. Next, customer. Next. So the customer dimension is created, and let me quickly create a date dimension. And next, let me add everything. Who cares? Finish. Now I'll go back to my cube. I'm going to delete these two because these references are deleted. Let me add a new measure group or new measure on sales data. I just want to see the quantity, and let me add a few other measures. Let's say tax amount and finally the profit. Okay. Now let me add those two dimensions. If I add those two dimensions, you can see something happened here. So 4 dimensions got added. Actually 2 dimensions. One is taking the join of the customer and another one is taking the join of the bill to customer. And then first one is taking the invoice date and another one is taking the delivery date. If you go to the dimension usage here, you can clearly understand the customer is joined to customer, to the sales site using the customer key, and there is the alias of the dimension which we are calling it as bill to customer, but if you see the join is by bill to customer. So what is the difference and why we need to have two? Let's say, for example, let me delete these 4 and let me go back to my data source view and let me take out the relationships. I told you relationships helps you, or the good data source view helps you. Let's say I've deleted this now and I'm going back to my cube and I'm going to add those 2 dimensions. It will stay as is because there is no relationship. There is no way that analysis service can understand how these are related. Now Let me go and give the relationships on my own. The customer, I'm trying to join to my sales by using the customer key because I want to see which customer has placed an order. Done. Second thing, I want to see when the invoice is generated. So I'm joining my date dimension with the invoice date key. Done. Let me quickly process it. Not going to take too long. Sorry. Yeah, deploying is taking more time than process. Okay, it's processing the dimensions because this is the first time, and it's done. Now if I go and browse the data, and if I see the tax amount or profit, quantity and tax amount, this is the total profit, quantity and tax amount. And if I go and get the, let's say for example, calendar year, this is by invoice date, which means when the invoice is in 2013, this is the profit, this is the quantity, and this is the tax amount. When the invoice generated is on 2014, this is the tax amount and so on. Now, how can we get the same information based on the delivery date? Now this is by invoice date because we joined invoice date with the date key column, right? And how can we get by the delivery date? Similarly, if you go and check here, I can check the customer. Who is the customer that placed an order? So this customer placed an order when this customer, I mean, this is wrong data, junk data. Don't mind. So let's say this is the customer name. Maybe this is the customer, a shop, toys, or whatever. This is the profit, and this is the quantity, and this is the tax amount. But to whom this is billed, you don't have that information because we don't have the dimensionality added to our cube. So how can we do that? How can we add those dimensions or the dimensionality to our cube? It's pretty simple. So first you can add these two, and you know this is the customer, and you know this is invoice date, right? You can rename it. And if you go to the properties of it, you can see the underlying dimension is date, which is ID, and the name, whatever it is showing, is invoice date. Now, next step is what you need to do is you need to add one more date. Add it, and you can rename it as delivered date. So now, if you see the underlying, this ID is the underlying dimension is date. Similarly, for this invoice, the underlying is date, the ID is date, but the name is the invoice date. Here, the name is delivered date, but underlying dimension is date. Now, how to give relationship? So this should be on delivered date. So for that, select the regular relationship and select the date key in the dimensions, and then in the measure groups, it should not be invoice date because this dimension is meant to see the data by delivered date. So select OK. That's it. One dimension. You use the same dimension to create one single dimension in database to create two dimensions in the cube. Now let's repeat the same for customer. If I select customer, it takes customer one. Let me rename it. I think it is bill to customer. And if I go to the dimension usage, I need to join this with the column, whatever that is for the bill to customer key. That's it. So all this work has been done by your analysis services. And if you see the Solution Explorer, the dimensions, whatever you have created here under the folder called dimensions, we call it as database level dimensions. So these dimensions are at this level, this database level, okay? And whatever the dimensions that you add to a particular cube is called cube level dimensions. Now, what is role-playing dimensions? A role-playing dimension is something which is a single dimension at database level, but plays a multiple roles in your cube. So one dimension at the database level plays a multiple roles in the cube. We call it as role-playing dimensions. So the classic example from real world is like if you take a person XYZ, he is a husband to a wife, he is a father to a son or daughter, and he is son to a parent, right? To a parent. So a single person is playing multiple roles. The same way, one single database level dimension can be used, can play multiple roles in your cube, and we call it as role-playing dimensions. So now we created it manually, and if you process it, let's quickly process it, and you should be able to see all the 4. Observe this very carefully, the processing command. Okay, it process completed, reconnect. Okay, now you see 4 dimensions, and if you have the sales, or let's say profit, if you select the customer, okay, when this guy is the customer, you see now it is showing as customer dot customer, because this belongs to the dimension customer. And this guy is the customer, and when this guy paid the bill, this is the profit. So most of the cases this will be same, or see, for this guy, head office paid the bill, so this is the profit. So for everything, head office paid the bill, right? If you have a different customer, bill to customer, then you will be seeing different data here, like my name, my wife name here, and my name here, or your name here, or your spouse name here. So it depends on who paid for that and who purchased that. Similarly, if you see, the classic example here is by delivery date and the invoice date. So if you take the invoice year, so when the invoice is on a particular year, these are the profits. Now, let me select the delivery year. When the invoice is 2013, not everything is delivered on 2013. Let's say there are some invoices generated on December 2013. Those are delivered in 2014. You see, when 2013, this is the profit. So invoice in 2013, but delivered in 2014, this is the total profit. Which means in December or in the late 2013, there were a lot of purchases happen during the holiday season. Similarly, for everything, you have some profits on the next year when the deliver was happen on the next year. So this is how you can make use of role-playing dimensions. The major concern with the role-playing dimensions is the attributes will be delivered date dot what you call calendar month label, delivered date dot calendar. So after the dot, if you see, it will be the same name. You see, calendar month label, here calendar month label. Instead of that, people wants to have their own dimensions with their own names for the attributes. Like instead of calling it as delivered date dot calendar month name, they want to call it as delivered month name, or delivered calendar month, delivered calendar year. How can we achieve that? So to achieve that, it's not a big thing. You can create one more dimension using the same date. So you understood, right? What is the concern of having the role-playing dimension? The only concern I see is the same names will be repeated, only the dimension name will be changed for this. The same name for the attributes will be repeated. Let me take the sales, what you call customer. It is easy. Okay. So I'm adding only customer and category, and let's say postal. Okay, let's say I've added these two, and I'll name it as bill to customer. Okay, and I can rename this. Bill to customer category, and I can rename this as I am selecting F2, but it's not accepting it. Bill to customer. Okay, now I am having my own attribute names. I'm not going with the same names for all the role-playing dimensions. So what I need to do is I created a new dimension with the same table, and in the cube structure, where is the bill to? I don't need this anymore. Add cube dimension, bill to customer, and regular, and customer key. Here it should go to bill to customer. And if I process it now, I'll have my own attributes. Okay, I'll have my own attributes, or the attributes that I wish to have. We call it as conformer dimensions. The same business for different different fact data. So we call it as conformer dimensions. It's very much close to the role-playing dimensions. So if you see the browser now, and let me reconnect it. If you go to the customer, you have bill to customer, you have buying category and so on. What you call the prefix has been removed because it is not a role-playing dimension anymore. Here, if you see, I have my bill to customer, I have my bill to customer category. Okay, so this is how you can have your own names for your attributes. But what is the problem? What is the advantage and disadvantages in each thing? To explain that, first let me explain the disadvantage of having a new dimension for every case. Let's say you have 10 different dates, and if you want to create 10 different date dimensions, what's going to happen? Let's see that. So before going to explain the disadvantages of having a new dimension in the data warehouse level, let me clear the process. Let me clear the cube process. Done. Now let me process full. So if you do the processing now, you will see, oops, it has taken out only this stuff. Let me process, unprocess everything here. Okay, to show you an example. So I'm doing process clear. Done. And if I do process full, so the problem here is, if you see every dimension, see the customer and the bill to customer both has to be processed. Let's say you have 10 date dimensions and each date dimension takes 5 minutes. So all the 10 date dimensions you created for each date, if you want to go by the confirmed dimension concepts, then all the 10 dimensions has to be processed. It's a burden on the server. If you will be getting more and more such scenarios. That's the biggest disadvantage of going for the confirmed dimensions, having a new dimension created for every business or every business rule. Okay. Now, if you see bill to customer, customer and date is processed. But if you see date is processed only once because we are using role playing for date. So now the advantage of role playing is the processing of the dimension will be once, but it will be used in 10 different places. So that means if you take role playing, let's say these are your set of dimensions 1, 2, 3, and this is your cube where you have this dimension referenced 20 times in your cube using the concept of role playing. So it will be processed only once, and it will be referenced. It will be like a join condition given to the copy of it. So this 10 dimensions, it won't process 10 times. It processes only one time. Instead, if you try to create a confirmed dimension for every scenario, then in that case, you will have 10 dimensions here. All the 10 dimensions will be processed if you don't go for role playing. Now, let's see what are the disadvantages of having role-playing dimensions. I see only two disadvantages. The first one is, as I explained, in the browser you'll have the same names here. If you see, let me reconnect. Oops, it's not processed. I think it's processed. I just need to reconnect. Okay. So if you see the delivered date, the same attribute names will be there with the prefix of this. This doesn't look good. That's one disadvantage. And the second disadvantage is, if you have 10 attributes required here, and if you have only 2 attributes required here, you cannot have that. All the 10 will be added, and you have to go here, and there is no option here to hide it, I guess. Or maybe you can hide the attributes. Let's quickly see. You can hide it, but it will be added to your cube. It's just hiding the cube. In the cube, it will be available. In MDX, you can query it, right? So on the other side, if you have a confirmed dimensions, you can have 10 attributes here and only 2 attributes here. It's your wish, right? So that is the advantages and disadvantages between the role playing and the confirmed dimensions. So that's it for today's session. We discussed about how to generate the time dimension on the data source and on the server and non-time dimension templates. And we have seen what are the confirmed dimensions and the role-playing dimensions and how can you create if the relationships are not given in your data source view, and how can you create it manually, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of each. In next session, we will discuss about the calculations and a few dimension types. We'll go to the calculations maybe KPIs, followed by KPIs, aggregations, perspectives, and translations. That's it for today, guys. See you in next session. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great day.